She thought it was just another Tuesday night shift at a run-down diner. She thought the trembling boy in the corner was just lost. But the moment Helen Vance threw her body over that child to shield him from a bullet, she didn't just save a life, she ignited a war. She had no idea that the terrified boy clutching her apron was the only son of Lorenzo Moretti, the most ruthless capo in the city, now trapped between a thankless police force and a criminal empire that owes her a blood debt. Helen is about to learn the most dangerous lesson of all. Sometimes the monster isn't the one holding the gun. Sometimes he's the one staring back at you from across the dinner table. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside the Rusty Spoon, a diner that smelled perpetually of burnt bacon and floor wax, Helen Vance wiped down counter number 4 for the third time. It was 11:45 p.m. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out sneakers, a rhythmic ache that matched the neon sign buzzing frantically in the window. "Helen, honey, you look like death warmed over," Marge, the 60-year-old owner with a beehive of grey hair, called out from the pass-through window. "Go home early. I'll close up." Helen forced a smile, tucking a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "I can't, Marge. Rent is due on Friday and I need the tips, even if it's just the late-night drunks." She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling the whole truth. It wasn't just rent. It was her brother's tuition, the medical bills from her mother's accident 2 years ago, and the crushing weight of a debt she hadn't accrued but was responsible for paying. At 24, Helen felt 40. The bell above the door chimed. Helen didn't look up immediately, wringing out her rag. "Sit anywhere you like. I'll be with you in a minute." When no one answered, she looked up. It wasn't a drunk. It was a child. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old. He was soaking wet, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, shivering violently. But it wasn't his state that caught Helen's eye. It was his clothes. He was wearing a miniature tailored suit that probably cost more than Helen made in a year. His shoes were Italian leather, now ruined by mud. And he was terrified. His eyes, a piercing shade of steel grey, darted around the empty diner like a trapped animal. Helen dropped the rag and rounded the counter instantly. "Hey there," she said, softly, keeping her hands visible. "You okay, buddy? Where are your parents?" The boy didn't speak. He backed away, bumping into a booth. He clutched a small wooden chess piece, a black knight in his hand, so tight his knuckles were white. "I'm not going to hurt you," Helen cooed, kneeling so she was at eye level. "My name is Helen. Do you have a name?" The boy hesitated, his teeth chattering. Leo, he whispered. "Okay, Leo. You want some hot chocolate on the house?" He nodded once, a jerky motion. Helen guided him to the booth, furthest from the window instinct telling her he needed to feel hidden. She rushed to get a towel and a mug of cocoa. As she wrapped the warm towel around his shoulders, she noticed a smudge of red on his white collar. Blood. But not his. "Marge!" Helen hissed toward the kitchen. "Call the police. Now!" "What? Why?" "Just do it." The door chime rang again. This time it wasn't soft. The door was thrown open with force slamming against the wall. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, charged with static. 2 men walked in. They were hulking, wearing cheap leather jackets that squeaked as they moved. They didn't look like customers. They looked like problems. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow, scanned the room. His eyes locked on the booth in the back. On Leo. "Found him," Scarface grunted, reaching into his jacket. Helen didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She didn't wonder who these men were. She saw a man reaching for a weapon and a child who was frozen in fear. "Hey!" Helen shouted, stepping into the aisle, blocking their line of sight. "We're closed. Move, bitch!" the second man snarled, stepping forward. He pulled a suppressed pistol from his waistband. The silencer made the gun look comically long, like something out of a movie, but the threat was very real. Leo let out a strangled whimper behind her. "I said, move!" The man raised the gun. Helen turned, grabbed Leo by the collar of his expensive suit, and shoved him under the heavy oak table of the booth. "Stay down and don't make a sound," she ordered. She turned back just as the first shot was fired. Thwip! The sound was underwhelming, like a staple gun. The ketchup bottle on the table next to Helen exploded, showering her in red glass and vinegar. "No!" Helen screamed, grabbing a ceramic napkin holder and hurling it with all the force of her adrenaline. It struck the gunman square in the forehead. It didn't knock him out, but it stunned him enough to buy her 3 seconds. "Marge, back door!" Helen yelled. She didn't run for the exit herself. She knew if she ran, they would just shoot the boy under the table. She had to be the distraction. She vaulted over the counter, crashing into the coffee machines. Glass shattered. "Get the kid, I'll kill the girl!" Scarface shouted. "No!" Helen grabbed a pot of boiling coffee and, blind with panic, threw it over the counter. The man screamed as the scalding liquid hit his face. He fired blindly. A bullet tore through the display case of pies, sending lemon meringue flying. Helen scrambled on the floor looking for a weapon, a steak knife, a frying pan, anything. She heard the heavy footsteps crunching over the glass. They were coming for Leo. "Don't touch him." Helen lunged from behind the counter, wielding a heavy cast-iron skillet. She swung it with hysterical strength, connecting with the arm of the man reaching under the table. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The man howled, dropping his gun. But the second man, the one with the coffee burns, was recovering. He raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Helen's chest. His eyes were dead devoid of humanity. "You should have stayed out of it," he rasped. Helen squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. She hoped it wouldn't hurt. She hoped Leo would stay quiet. Bang! The sound was deafening. It wasn't the suppressed thwip from before. It was a cannon blast. Helen didn't feel pain. She opened her eyes. The man who was about to kill her dropped to his knees, a dark hole in the center of his chest, before face-planting into the linoleum. Helen looked toward the door. Standing in the entrance, framed by the pouring rain and the flashing lights of black SUVs, not police cars, was a man. He was tall, over 6'3", wearing a suit that made Leo's look like a knockoff. A long black wool coat hung from his shoulders. His face was sharp, angular, like it had been carved from marble, and his eyes were the exact same shade of steel gray as the boy shivering under the table. He held a smoking desert eagle in his hand, his aim steady, his expression completely emotionless. Behind him, 6 other men poured into the diner, moving with military precision. They secured the room in seconds. The man in the long coat didn't look at Helen. He walked past her, his heavy footsteps echoing, and knelt by the booth. "Leonardo," he said. His voice was deep, commanding, yet laced with a strange, restrained vibration. The boy crawled out from under the table. "Papa!" The man Lorenzo Moretti scooped the boy up into his arms, burying his face in the child's neck, for a split second, the only sign of weakness, before standing up and turning his cold gaze to Helen. Helen was still on the floor, clutching the cast-iron skillet, covered in coffee grounds, pie filling, and the blood of the men who had tried to kill the child. She was trembling so hard, her teeth clicked. Lorenzo Moretti looked at the dead men, then at his son, and finally at Helen. He holstered his gun. "You," he said. It wasn't a question. Helen's voice failed her. "Matteo," Lorenzo barked at one of his men. "Check the perimeter. Make sure no one saw this." He looked back at Helen. "Did you call the police?" My boss did," Helen whispered. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Unfortunate." He stepped closer to her, towering over her small frame. "You saved him." You threw coffee and a skillet." He looked at the unconscious man with the broken arm. "You broke his radius. He was going to shoot Leo." Lorenzo stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. He seemed to be dissecting her soul, looking for a lie. Then he reached into his coat pocket. Helen flinched, thinking he was going for a gun again. Instead, he pulled out a pristine white handkerchief and handed it to her. "Wipe your face, Miss Vance. Helen Vance. Miss Vance, you have my gratitude." "I don't want your gratitude," Helen said, her voice shaking, but gaining a hint of steel. "I want to know why grown men were trying to execute a 6-year-old in my diner." The room went silent. The other men in suits stopped moving. No one spoke to Lorenzo Moretti that way. Lorenzo tilted his head, a flicker of interest lighting up his dark eyes. "An excellent question. One you will have plenty of time to ask." "What does that mean?" "It means Helen Vance," Lorenzo said, signaling his men who suddenly surrounded her, "that the police are coming, and I cannot have you telling them what you saw tonight. You're coming with us." "What?" "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." Helen scrambled backward, but 2 men grabbed her arms. They weren't rough, but their grip was iron. "It is for your own protection," Lorenzo said calmly, turning his back on her as he carried Leo toward the door. "The men who sent these assassins, they don't leave loose ends, and as of tonight, you are a loose end." "This is kidnapping," Helen screamed as she was dragged toward the black SUVs. "Call it protective custody," Lorenzo replied without looking back. "Welcome to the family, Helen." The ride was silent, suffocatingly so. Helen sat in the back of the second SUV, sandwiched between 2 men who looked like they were carved out of granite. The leather seats were soft, the windows tinted so dark that the city outside was just a blur of streaked lights. She tried to memorize the route. Left on 4th, right onto the highway, heading north. But after 20 minutes of winding roads leading toward the posh, secluded estates of Mercer Island, she lost track. Her mind raced. Lorenzo Moretti. She knew the name. Everyone in Seattle knew the name, though it was usually whispered. Real estate mogul on paper, head of the most powerful crime syndicate on the West Coast in reality. And she had just yelled at him and saved his son. The car slowed, crunching over gravel. Huge iron gates swung open, revealing a driveway lined with ancient pines, leading up to a sprawling modern mansion that looked more like a fortress of glass and steel than a home. The car stopped. The door opened. "Out!" one of the guards said. Helen stepped out into the drizzle. The air here smelled different pine needles and ozone, crisp and expensive. Lorenzo was already out of the lead car, carrying Leo, who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. He walked up the stone steps, the front doors opening automatically for him. "Bring her to the library," Lorenzo commanded over his shoulder, "and get Dr. Aris. Check her for injuries." Helen was marched into the house. The foyer was cavernous, with double-height ceilings and a chandelier that looked like a cascading waterfall of crystals. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly terrifying. She was led into a library that smelled of old paper and scotch. The walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace. "Sit," the guard said, pointing to a leather armchair. Helen sat. She hugged herself, realizing she was still wearing her diner uniform, stained with coffee and blood. She felt small, dirty. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the double doors opened. Lorenzo walked in. He had removed his coat. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, revealing a crisp white shirt and a gun holster strapped to his chest. He held 2 glasses of amber liquid. He walked over and placed one on the small table beside her. Bourbon. Top shelf. It will help with the shock. I don't drink, Helen said, her voice hoarse. Tonight you drink. He took a sip of his own, leaning against the heavy oak desk, crossing his ankles. He watched her. Dr. Aris examined Leo. He is physically unharmed. Shaken but fine. He told me you put him under the table. It was the only cover available. He also said you gave him your coat. It was cold. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed slightly. Why did you do it, Helen? Do what? Risk your life. You saw guns. You saw killers. Most people run. You stood in front of a bullet. Why? Helen looked down at her hands. He's a child. He was alone. I didn't think about it. I just couldn't let them hurt him. Altruism, Lorenzo mused, as if testing the word to see if it tasted bitter. A rare commodity, or a very clever lie. Helen looked up, anger flaring through her fear. A lie you think I staged a hit on a diner for, what to impress you. My enemies are resourceful. Planting a savior to gain access to my home is exactly the kind of move the Russo family would make. I don't know who the Russos are. I'm a waitress. I worry about tips and my brother's tuition. I don't play gangster games. Lorenzo set his glass down. He walked toward her, moving with the grace of a predator. He stopped inches from her chair, placing his hands on the armrests, boxing her in. We checked your background on the ride over, he said softly. His face was so close she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes. Helen Vance, 24. Parents deceased. Brother Toby, 19, studying architecture at UW. You have $42,000 in debt left over from your mother's surgeries. You live in a studio apartment in Capitol Hill. Helen's heart hammered against her ribs. You have no right. I have every right, he interrupted, because tonight you entered my world, and in my world knowledge is survival. He stood up straight, backing away. The men who attacked you tonight were indeed Russos. They broke a 10-year truce. They tried to take my heir. His voice dropped an octave, turning into a low growl. They will burn for it. Okay, Helen said, standing up on shaky legs. I'm glad your son is safe, really. But I've told you what happened. Can I go home now? Please. Lorenzo looked at her with an expression that was almost pitying. No, Helen. You can't. Why not? Because the Russos failed, and now they know your face. You are the witness who can identify their hitmen. You are the woman who humiliated their soldiers. If I let you walk out that door, you will be dead before sunrise. Helen felt the blood drain from her face. So, what I'm a prisoner. You are a guest, Lorenzo corrected. Until I deal with the Russo threat, you stay here. Where I can see you. Where I can protect you. And how long will that take? Lorenzo picked up his drink again, swirling the liquid. As long as it takes. Before Helen could argue, the library door creaked open. A small head poked through. It was Leo. He was wearing silk pajamas, now holding the black chess knight. Papa! Lorenzo's demeanor shifted instantly. The cold mask cracked. Leo, You should be asleep. I had a nightmare. The boy looked past his father and saw Helen. His eyes lit up. Helen! He ran across the room, ignoring his father, and buried his face in Helen's stained apron. Helen froze, then instinctively placed a hand on the boy's head. Hey, Leo. It's okay. You're safe. Lorenzo watched them. He watched how his son, who hadn't spoken to a stranger in 2 years, since his mother died, clung to this waitress. He watched how Helen, despite her terror, immediately comforted the child. A complicated look crossed the Don's face. Suspicion mingled with something else. Calculation. It seems, Lorenzo said quietly, that you have been promoted, Miss Vance. Promoted to what? Helen asked, looking over Leo's head. My son needs a caretaker. His last nanny quit. Abruptly. I'm not a nanny. You are now, Lorenzo said, turning to leave the room. The guest wing is the 3rd door on the left, upstairs. Get some sleep, Helen. Tomorrow we go shopping. If you're going to live in my house, you can't dress like... He gestured vaguely at her uniform. That. I didn't agree to this, Helen called out. Lorenzo paused at the door. You saved a Moretti, Helen. You are responsible for him now. That is the rule. He closed the door, leaving her alone with the boy, and the fire trapped in a golden cage with the most dangerous man in the city holding the key. The next morning, Helen woke up in a bed that cost more than her entire college education. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, the pillows like clouds. For a disorienting second, she forgot where she was. Then the memory of the gunshot and the blood-spattered diner crashed back into her mind. She wasn't a guest. She was collateral damage. She found a set of fresh clothes folded on the chaise lounge, simple, elegant loungewear in charcoal grey. She changed, feeling like an imposter in the silk fabric, and tentatively opened her bedroom door. The hallway was silent. She wandered down the grand staircase, following the smell of roasted coffee. She found the kitchen a stainless steel cathedral of culinary equipment. A stern-faced woman in a crisp uniform was chopping melon. This was Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper. She looked at Helen with barely concealed disdain. Mr. Moretti expects you in the sunroom. Don't keep him waiting. Helen swallowed her pride. Thank you. She found the sunroom at the back of the house. It was a glass-walled enclosure overlooking a misty garden. Lorenzo sat at a round table, reading a newspaper, a cup of espresso untouched beside him. Across from him sat Leo. Between them lay a chessboard. Leo was staring intently at the pieces his brow furrowed. Lorenzo looked up as Helen entered. He didn't smile. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to the empty chair. Eat. A plate of eggs and fruit was placed before her by a silent server. I need to call my brother, Helen said, not sitting. He'll worry if I don't check in. Your brother has been informed that you are taking a temporary high-paying job as a live-in companion for a wealthy family in the Hamptons. He believes you are safe and happy. Helen's jaw dropped. You lied to him. I protected him. If he knows where you are, the Russos will find him and use him to get to you. Is that what you want? Helen deflated, sinking into the chair. He had checkmated her before she'd even moved a pawn. No. Good. Lorenzo turned his attention back to his son. Your move, Leonardo. Don't hesitate. Leo's hand hovered over a bishop. He was trembling slightly. The pressure from his father was palpable. Lorenzo wasn't being cruel, but he was demanding excellence, a heavy weight for a 6-year-old. Leo moved the bishop. Lorenzo sighed a sound of disappointment. Careless. You exposed your king. He reached out to capture the piece. Wait, Helen said. Lorenzo's hand froze. He looked at her, his eyes cold. Excuse me. He didn't expose his king, Helen said, staring at the board. She reached over, ignoring the shock on Lorenzo's face, and pointed to the black knight Leo had positioned 3 moves ago. He's setting a trap. If you take the bishop, his knight takes your rook, and you're in a forced mate in 4 moves. Silence descended on the sunroom. The only sound was the rain tapping against the glass. Lorenzo looked at the board. He studied it. His eyes narrowed as he traced the lines of attack Helen had just described. Slowly, a look of genuine surprise replaced his mask of indifference. He looked at his son. Did you plan that, Leo? Leo nodded shyly, looking at Helen with awe. Lorenzo turned his gaze to Helen. It was a heavy, intense stare that made her skin prickle. You play. My father taught me, Helen said quietly. Before the accident, we didn't have money for video games or cable TV. We had a chessboard. You have a sharp mind for a waitress, Lorenzo murmured. Waiting tables is all about strategy. Helen shot back, her annoyance flaring. Managing time, predicting needs, dealing with difficult people who think they own the place. She held his gaze. For the first time, the corner of Lorenzo's mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. Touché. Suddenly the doors burst open. A man strode in. He was younger than Lorenzo, perhaps late 20s, with slicked back hair and a flashy, arrogant energy. This was Santino Lorenzo's younger cousin and underboss. Lorenzo, Santino barked, ignoring Helen and the child. We have a problem at the docks. The shipment was flagged. Lorenzo's face hardened instantly. The father vanished. The Don returned. He stood up. Leo, go to your room. Helen, go with him. But now... Lorenzo's voice was a whip crack. Helen grabbed Leo's hand and hurried him out. As she left, she glanced back. She saw Santino, leaning close to Lorenzo, whispering urgently. She didn't like the look in Santino's eyes. It wasn't loyalty. It was hunger. Up in Leo's room, which was filled with more toys than a department store, yet felt incredibly lonely. Helen sat on the floor with him. You're really good at chess, Leo, she said softly. Leo looked down at his hands. Papa wants me to be strong, like him. You are strong. Being smart is a different kind of strength. Leo reached under his bed and pulled out a shoebox. Inside were drawings, dozens of them. They weren't doodles, they were architectural sketches. Bridges, towers, safe houses. Did you draw these? Helen asked, stunned. The perspective was perfect. Leo nodded. I want to build safe places, so the bad men can't get in. Helen's heart broke. This child heir to a violent empire just wanted to build walls to keep the world out. Helen, Leo whispered, don't leave me, please. Helen looked at the boy who had no mother, a father who was a warlord and a target on his back. She thought of her escape plan of running away the first chance she got. She squeezed his hand. I'm not going anywhere, Leo. I promise. 2 weeks passed. The mansion, which had felt like a prison, began to feel like a fortress under siege. The tension in the air was thick. Lorenzo was gone most days, returning late at night, smelling of cigar smoke and gunpowder. Helen fell into a routine. Breakfast with Leo. Tutoring him, he was homeschooled for security. Chess in the afternoon. But she wasn't just babysitting. She was watching. She noticed things. She noticed that the security shift changed at 6:00 p.m. exactly. She noticed that Mrs. Higgins always left the back pantry unlocked for the delivery drivers. And she noticed Santino. Santino came by often, usually when Lorenzo was out. He would prowl the house, treating the staff like dirt. He watched Helen with a predatory gaze that made her skin crawl. One Tuesday evening, a storm had knocked out the power in the West Wing. Helen was walking down the hallway to get candles from the supply closet when she heard voices coming from the library. The door was cracked open. "He's getting weak, Marco. He's distracted by the boy. And now this girl." It was Santino's voice. "Lorenzo is cautious," another voice replied. Deep, gravelly. One of the capos. "Cautious is another word for scared," Santino spat. "The Russos are offering a truce if we give up the downtown territory. Lorenzo says no. He wants war. I say we make a deal, if Lorenzo isn't around to stop it." Helen pressed her hand over her mouth, her heart thundering in her ears. Treason. They were planning a coup. She stepped back the floorboard, creaking loudly in the silent hallway. The voices stopped. "Who's there?" Santino shouted. Helen didn't wait. She kicked off her slippers and sprinted down the hall, diving into the linen closet, just as the library door flew open. "Probably just the wind," the other man grunted. "I don't like it," Santino muttered. "Check the perimeter." Helen waited in the dark, smelling lavender detergent, trembling. She knew too much. If Santino found her, she was dead. She waited an hour before daring to move. She went straight to Lorenzo's study, but it was empty. He wasn't home yet. She went to her room, locked the door, and pushed a chair under the handle. She didn't sleep. At 2:00 a.m., she heard the heavy front door open. Lorenzo's footsteps. Helen unlocked her door and rushed out to the landing. Lorenzo was at the bottom of the stairs, unbuttoning his shirt. He looked exhausted. There was a fresh bandage on his forearm, spotting blood. "Lorenzo," she whispered. He looked up his hand instantly, going to his waist, then relaxing when he saw her. "Helen, it's late. Go to bed." She ran down the stairs, her bare feet cold on the marble. "We need to talk. Now. Not here." She pulled him into the small powder room under the stairs, the only room with no windows, and locked the door. Lorenzo looked at her, amused and slightly delirious from fatigue. "If you wanted to get me alone in a closet, Miss Vance, you could have just asked." "Shut up," she hissed. "This is serious. I heard Santino." Lorenzo's playfulness vanished. His eyes went hard. "What did you hear?" He was talking to Marco, in the library. "He said you're weak. He said the Russos offered a deal for the downtown territory. And he said they could make the deal if you weren't around to stop it." Lorenzo didn't explode. He didn't shout. He went perfectly, terrifyingly still. "You are certain it was Marco?" "Yes. I saw him leave." Lorenzo leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. "Marco, my father's best friend. He held me when I was a baby." "Lorenzo, I'm sorry." He opened his eyes and looked at her. In the dim light of the powder room, the space between them felt charged. He reached out his rough hand, cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone. "You are a strange creature, Helen," he whispered. "You should be running from me. Instead, you are saving me again." "I'm saving Leo," she said breathlessly. "If you die, he has no one." "Is that the only reason?" His face was inches from hers. She could smell the bourbon and the metallic tang of blood. Her heart wasn't racing from fear anymore. Lorenzo leaned in. His lips brushed hers, a feather-light touch that sent a shock wave through her body. It wasn't a kiss of possession. It was a question. Then he pulled back abruptly, grimacing as his arm shifted. "You're bleeding," Helen said, her voice shaking. "A graze. Business dispute." "Let me fix it. I have doctors." "You have a traitor in your house," Helen reminded him. "Do you want to wake up the doctor, or do you want to trust the waitress?" Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment. Then he sat on the closed toilet lid and held out his arm. "Trust the waitress." The annual Seattle Charity Gala was the highlight of the social season. It was also, as Lorenzo explained, neutral ground, the one night where the city's crime lords rubbed shoulders with politicians and judges pretending to be civilized. "You are attending with me," Lorenzo announced 3 days after the closet incident. "I can't go there," Helen protested. "I don't have a dress. I don't know which fork to use. I'm a waitress, Lorenzo." "You are my partner for the evening, and you are not a waitress tonight. You are Helen Vance, the chess prodigy and private tutor to my son." He tossed a velvet box onto the bed. "Wear this." Inside was a dress that made Helen gasp. Emerald green silk backless with a slit that went up to her thigh. It was dangerous. It was a weapon. "Why me?" she asked. "Because," Lorenzo said, adjusting his cufflinks, "Santino will be there. The Russos will be there. I need someone watching my back who isn't on the payroll. Someone who sees the board." When Helen walked down the stairs that evening, the air left the room. Lorenzo, waiting at the bottom in a tuxedo, actually stopped speaking mid-sentence to his security chief. He walked up to her, took her hand, and kissed her knuckles. "If we weren't walking into a war zone," he murmured, "I would never let you leave this house looking like that." The gala was held at the Art Museum. Champagne flowed, diamonds sparkled, and the air was thick with lies. Helen stayed glued to Lorenzo's side. She felt the eyes on them, the whispers. Who is she? Is she his new mistress? "Keep your head up," Lorenzo whispered in her ear, his hand warm on the small of her back. "They smell fear." "I'm not scared," Helen lied. "I'm analyzing." "Good girl." Halfway through the night, they were cornered near the sculpture garden. A man approached. He was older, heavy-set, with a face like a bulldog. Vincenzo Russo, the man who had ordered the hit on Leo. Behind him stood Santino. Helen's blood ran cold. "Lorenzo," Russo smiled, his teeth yellow. "And this must be the brave little shield." He looked at Helen with mocking appraisal. "Vincenzo." Lorenzo nodded, his body tense. "Enjoying the wine, I hear. It's a vintage year for betrayal." He glanced at Santino. Santino didn't flinch. "Just business, cousin." "I hear you have a proposal, Lorenzo," Russo said, stepping closer. "Surrender the ports, or we continue our disagreement." "My answer hasn't changed," Lorenzo said. "That's unfortunate." Russo sighed. "Because the Port Authority is investigating your warehouses as we speak. Someone tipped them off about the shipment tonight." Lorenzo stiffened. This was the checkmate. If the police raided the warehouses tonight, Lorenzo would go to prison for life. Russo smirked. "Looks like you lose Moretti." Helen stepped forward. "Actually," she said, her voice clear and bell-like, cutting through the tension. "You might want to check your sources, Mr. Russo." Russo looked at her, annoyed. "The help is speaking." "The shipment isn't at the warehouses," Helen said, bluffing with every ounce of courage she had. She remembered the architectural drawings Leo had shown her. The safe places. Lorenzo moved the inventory 3 hours ago. To the old steel mill in Georgetown. Russo's smile faltered. He looked at Santino. "Is this true?" Santino looked panicked. He didn't know. Because Lorenzo hadn't told anyone. And Helen continued locking eyes with Russo. If the police raid the warehouses, all they'll find are empty crates and a lawsuit for harassment. However, she took a step closer to Russo. I hear the Russo family holds their assets in the Caymans. It would be a shame if the IRS received the encrypted ledger that was misplaced recently. She was making it up, completely. But she said it with the confidence of a grandmaster declaring checkmate. Russo turned pale. He didn't know what she knew, but he knew Lorenzo was capable of anything. "You're bluffing," Russo hissed. "Are you willing to bet your empire on it?" Helen arched an eyebrow. Russo stared at her. Then at Lorenzo, who looked as shocked as Russo felt, though he hid it better. "We will talk later," Russo spat. He turned and marched away, Santino trailing behind him like a whipped dog. Lorenzo grabbed Helen's arm and steered her toward the exit. "Did you move the shipment?" she whispered as they walked fast. "No," Lorenzo said, a grin breaking across his face. "But I'm calling my men to move it right now." They burst out of the museum doors into the cool night air. The valet brought the car around. "You were magnificent," Lorenzo said, opening the door for her. "You saved us." "I just played the game." Helen breathed adrenaline crashing through her. They got into the car. As they pulled away, the mood was electric. Lorenzo looked at her with a mixture of desire and respect that made her knees weak. "Helen," he started. "When this is over," boom! The world exploded. An SUV rammed into the side of their car, spinning them off the road. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. The car flipped rolling down the embankment into the dark woods below. Helen's world went black. Silence. That was the first thing Helen noticed. The roar of the engine was gone, replaced by the hissing of steam and the drip, drip, drip of rain on metal. She opened her eyes. The world was upside down. She was hanging in her seatbelt, the blood rushing to her head. The windshield was gone. "Lorenzo," she rasped, a groan from the driver's side. Lorenzo was slumped over his head, bleeding profusely. His door was crushed inward, pinning his left leg. "Lorenzo, wake up!" Helen fumbled with her buckle. It clicked and she fell onto the roof of the overturned car, glass biting into her palms. She scrambled over the center console. "Lorenzo!" He coughed, his eyes fluttering open. They were hazy, unfocused. "Leo is safe. He's at home." Helen said, her voice trembling but firm. She grabbed his face. "We have to move. They're coming." She heard car doors slamming up on the road. Voices. Flashlights cutting through the mist above them. "Check the wreck. No survivors." It was Santino's voice. Adrenaline surged through Helen's veins, washing away the pain. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a girl from Seattle. She was the queen, protecting her king. "I'm pinned," Lorenzo gritted out, trying to move. He cried out in pain. Helen looked at the crushed metal. She braced her feet against the dashboard and the roof, grabbing the caved-in doorframe. "Push when I pull." "On 3. 1, 2, 3. She screamed with effort, her muscles tearing. Lorenzo roared, shoving with his good leg. The metal screeched, giving way just enough. Lorenzo dragged himself free, falling onto the glass next to her. He couldn't stand on his left leg. "Leave me," he panted, reaching for his gun. It was gone, lost in the crash. "Run, Helen. Hide in the woods." "I don't leave my family," Helen snapped. She grabbed his arm, slinging it over her shoulder. "Get up." They crawled out of the shattered windshield into the mud. The slope was steep, covered in dense ferns and pine trees. "Down there," Helen whispered, pointing to a ravine where the shadows were deepest. They stumbled down, sliding more than walking. Behind them, beams of light swept over the wreck. "They're gone," a mercenary shouted. "Track them!" Helen dragged Lorenzo through the underbrush. He was heavy, dead weight, leaning on her, his breathing ragged. "You need to know," Lorenzo wheezed. "If we don't make it, there is a safe in the library. Combination is Leo's birthday. The evidence against Santino is there." "Shut up!" Helen hissed, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "We're making it." They found shelter under the root system of a massive fallen cedar tree. It formed a small muddy cave. Helen pushed Lorenzo inside and covered the opening with fern fronds. She huddled next to him, shivering. The temperature was dropping. Lorenzo's skin was cold and clammy. Shock was setting in. "Talk to me," Helen whispered, tearing the silk skirt of her gala dress to bind his bleeding head. "Stay awake, Lorenzo. You look beautiful," he murmured, his eyes half closed, even covered in mud. "Flattery won't save you," she choked out. A twig snapped nearby. Helen froze. Lorenzo's hand instinctively went to his waist, grasping at air where his holster should be. Footsteps. Heavy, crunching boots. "I see tracks," a voice close. Too close. Helen looked around. They were trapped. If she stayed, they would both die. If she moved... She looked at Lorenzo. He was fading. He couldn't fight. Helen made a choice. She kissed his forehead, a fierce, desperate kiss. "I'll be right back." "No!" Lorenzo grabbed her wrist, his grip weak. "Helen, don't..." She pulled her hand away. "Checkmate." She slipped out from under the roots. She picked up a heavy rock in one hand and a jagged piece of metal from the car wreckage she had found earlier in the other. She moved away from the hiding spot, creating noise, crashing through a bush. "Over here!" a voice shouted. 3 beams of light swung toward her. Helen ran. She ran perpendicular to the slope, drawing them away from Lorenzo. "It's the girl!" She scrambled over a mossy log, her lungs burning. A shot rang out, chipping the bark beside her ear. She didn't stop. She reached a clearing, a rocky outcrop overlooking the river below. Dead end. She turned around. 3 men emerged from the trees. In the center was Santino holding a silenced pistol. He looked manic, his tuxedo torn, his eyes wild. "Nowhere to run, sweetheart." Santino grinned. "Where is he? Where is the great Lorenzo Moretti?" Helen backed up to the edge of the cliff. The river roared 50 feet below. "He's dead." Helen lied, her voice steady. "He died in the crash." Santino's face fell for a second, then twisted into a sneer. "Good. Saves me a bullet. But you're a loose end." He raised the gun. "Wait," Helen shouted. "You don't want to kill me, Santino." "And why is that?" "Because I'm the only one who knows the password to the offshore accounts," she improvised desperately. "Lorenzo gave it to me tonight, in the car." Santino paused. Greed flickered in his eyes. "You're lying. Am I kill me and you get the crown, but you don't get the gold? You'll be a king of ashes." Santino lowered the gun slightly. "Tell me the password." "Come closer," Helen whispered. "I'll whisper it." Santino stepped forward, arrogant, foolish. He motioned his men to stay back. He walked right up to her, invading her space. "Tell me," he hissed. Helen leaned in. "The password is..." She gripped the jagged metal shard in her hand tighter. "Go to hell." She slashed upward. It wasn't a lethal blow, but the metal tore across Santino's cheek. He screamed, staggering back, clutching his face. "Kill her!" he shrieked. Helen turned to jump. She would take her chances with the river. But before she could leap, a thunderous boom echoed through the clearing. One of the henchmen's heads exploded. Helen spun around. Lorenzo was there. He was leaning against a tree for support, pale as death, holding a gun he must have taken from one of the trackers he'd ambushed. "Get away from her!" Lorenzo roared. It was the voice of a demon. The second henchman turned to fire, but Lorenzo was faster. Bang! 2 down. Santino, bleeding and terrified, scrambled for his dropped gun. Lorenzo limped forward, ignoring the agony in his leg. He didn't fire. He walked right up to his cousin. "Lorenzo, please, it was Russo." "He forced me," Santino pleaded, crawling backward in the mud. Lorenzo looked down at him. There was no mercy in his eyes, only ice. "You betrayed your blood," Lorenzo said quietly. "For money. I'm family. Not anymore." Lorenzo didn't shoot him. He simply pistol-whipped him, a brutal, efficient strike to the temple. Santino slumped into the mud, unconscious. Lorenzo swayed. The adrenaline was running out. He dropped the gun and fell to his knees. "Lorenzo!" Helen ran to him, catching him before he hit the ground. He looked up at her, his hand trembling as he touched her face. You were the bait. I was the distraction," she corrected, sobbing with relief. "You are—" Lorenzo coughed, blood staining his lips. "You are dangerous, Helen Vance." "Only when I have to be." Sirens wailed in the distance. Real police sirens this time. Or maybe Lorenzo's extraction team. Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "Take me home, Helen." 1 year later. The garden was in full bloom. White roses, Leo's favorite, lined the path to the gazebo. Helen sat on the bench watching Leo play fetch with a golden retriever puppy. The boy was taller now, his cheeks flushed with health, the shadows gone from his eyes. He laughed a pure, joyous sound that echoed off the mansion walls. "He looks happy," a deep voice rumbled behind her. Helen didn't turn. She knew that voice better than her own heartbeat. "He is happy. He has a dog. And he just beat his math tutor in chess 3 times in a row." Lorenzo stepped into view. He moved with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of that night in the woods, but it only added to his imposing presence. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, but his tie was undone. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. His thumb rubbed over the diamond ring on her finger, a rock so big it felt heavy, yet she never took it off. "And you?" Lorenzo asked, bringing her hand to his lips. "Are you happy, Mrs. Moretti?" Helen smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I miss the diner sometimes, the smell of burnt bacon." "I can have the chef burn some bacon for you," Lorenzo deadpanned. Helen laughed. "I think I'll pass." It had been a long year. Recovery had been slow. The war with the Russos had been brutal but short. With Santino's testimony, extracted before he was permanently exiled, Lorenzo had dismantled the Russo Empire, piece by piece. Vincenzo Russo was in federal prison. The Morettis were untouchable. But the biggest change wasn't in the city streets. It was in this house. The cold, empty museum had become a home. "I have a surprise for you," Lorenzo said. "I told you no more gifts. You already bought me a library. This is different." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Helen opened it. It was a deed A deed to a building in downtown Seattle. "What is this?" "The rusty spoon," Lorenzo said. "Marge wanted to retire. I bought it." Helen looked at him, eyes wide. "You bought the diner." "I'm turning it into a shelter," Lorenzo said softly. "A community center for at-risk youth. A safe place, like Leo wanted to build." Helen felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at the man who the world called a monster and saw the heart he hid so carefully. "You're going to name it after yourself," she teased, wiping a tear. "The Moretti Center for Wayward Youth." "No," Lorenzo said, looking at Leo playing in the grass. "We're calling it the Knight's Refuge." He turned to her, his grey eyes intense and full of a love that terrified and thrilled her. "Because a knight saved a king that night, and a queen saved them both." Helen cupped his face. "I love you, Lorenzo. I love you, Helen, until my last breath." He kissed her a deep, lingering kiss that tasted of promise and peace. As they broke apart, Leo ran over the puppy, barking at his heels. "Papa, Helen, look what I found." He held up a white queen chess piece he had found in the grass. Helen took it, twirling it in her fingers. The piece that could move in any direction, the most powerful piece on the board. She looked at her husband, her son, and her home. She had started as a pawn, terrified and alone. But she had played the game, and she had won. "Come on," Helen said, standing up and grabbing Leo's hand and Lorenzo's arm. "Let's go inside. It's time for dinner." The sun set over the Moretti estate, casting long golden shadows. The gates were closed. The guards were posted, but inside, for the first time in a generation, there was no fear, only family. And that is the story of Helen and Loreno from a rainy night in a diner to the top of the criminal underworld. Helen proved that you don't need a gun to be the strongest person in the room. Sometimes you just need courage and a killer chess strategy. I hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance and danger. If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and if you want more stories about hidden identities, billionaire romances, and unexpected heroes, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. What was your favorite moment? Did you think Santino was the traitor? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.